Good afternoon, welcome. Thank you for all attending. My name is Dente. I'm the CTO of Onnec IQ. If you want to come visit us afterwards, on stand D30 down there. The importance of data within a building is the only way to make decisions. It doesn't matter where the data comes from or what it is. Without it, making decisions is difficult. Now, I do this from a practical point of view. I've been doing this for a living for 9 years. Savings are not just energy, okay? You can make real decisions to operationally improve your building based on information. So we go through collecting the data, predictive analytics. Notice I don't call it AI, okay? You don't need AI to do predictive analytics. Fault validation and root cause analysis, prioritization and decision framework, actionable outputs. Now, we're actually doing this with a client right now. All of these steps to give them real information about their building and how it's going to operate. And then we're going on to some information about meeting rooms and the way we change cooling and how you work out energy savings. The early warnings, there are lots of ways out there to do that. The early warnings allow you to repair things quicker, earlier, but more importantly, we can work out the energy that you save by doing early maintenance. So a very common failing is filters get dirty in air systems. The fan has to work harder to drive air through a dirty filter. The BMS system may or may not alert you to that quickly. But knowing it early, seeing the behavior change, you can see, well, if I change that, I can save energy here. And then the other active maintenance issues that occur throughout a building, by grouping them together, you can save people costs. Somebody doing 6 or 7 jobs within a building at a time instead of 1 at a time as they're alerted. Information is king. More importantly, it's what you do with it. Too much information, however, as you'll see on a later slide, has a balancing costs against what you're saving. So, information down to device level, not just at floor level or energy level for a quarter of a floor, not relying on energy meters is actually important. If you actually look at every device and what it's doing, you will then be able to see, well, I could change the operation of my building by changing the way these are behaving. And you do that based on how the building is being used, what you're seeing really happening, how you get the information. It can be directly from a VMS system, it could be from the lighting system, it could be from a platform. It could be lots of ways to get the data. Having it in one place is how you make the decisions. But if you go back 9 years, when I first started doing smart buildings, there was no centralized data. It was all different systems. But you could still make the decisions. Now, of course, everyone wants to make it easier, single platform. One of the key things about having the information is, if you actually monitor something correctly, you might see that it's been configured to a temporary change, like I'm going to run the aircon at 100% all the time. People forget, they leave some of it like that. You should be able to identify the gap between how it should be operating and how it is operating and work out those savings. It's a common failing. I've seen it in God knows how many buildings now, where somebody does a quick fix, forgets, walks away. Yeah, it's nice and cold, but actually, you're trying to chill something now to say 17, 18 degrees, when really it should be operating at about 21. So, an example now of what you can do with the information. A meeting room. If you look up here, that's how it's been done for years. No intelligence to it. Going back 9, 10, 12 years, that's how it's been done. You call it, you do no attention to the booking, whether the room's in use, it's just being called. If you link it to sensors or PIR sensors that often get installed or occupancy sensors, you can now say, I'm not going to cool it, for this unoccupied period. I know when the booking starts, so I'm going to put the cooling or heating on, depending on what temperature you want to get to. And then I'm going to get right down here. It's finished. I'm going to stop using the energy again. Stop cooling. This is achievable today. In fact, it has been achievable for a number of years without anything other than the systems that have been installed. This can also then be extended to go, I'm using the wrong room size. The misuse I see in buildings of rooms, I walked around one client's campus in California. They had one person in rooms for 20. And yet right next door was a one-person room. All they were doing was a Teams call. And yet they've now forced the system to call the room as though it's fully occupied. We put on the screen, as an experiment, how much that room was now costing them to run and how much carbon it was creating. It changes behavior. Without actually having to do anything but just inform people, by you misusing this room, you have now spent this much more carbon and this much more energy. But you need the information, the data, to do that. So, can you save money? Well, yes and no. Mostly yes. One of the things I went through with one client, they've got 300 odd buildings. They wanted all data, every single piece of data possible. We worked out their cloud storage costs for that, 21 million a year. And therefore, we sat down with them for a few hours, run through why they wanted to do it, and what they could achieve by not doing that, and eventually got their bill down to 7 million a year. So the amount of data has to be offset against what you can save in other areas like energy. If you don't do that calculation, you will end up having so much information, so much storage cost, your ROI is gone. You've wasted it in collecting too much data. And you won't have achieved any better output. And that happened because they had a data person look at it and not a building person. They assumed that by having all the data, they could make bigger savings, but then when you balance it against the cost, that wasn't true. Okay, so data storage costs have to be factored in. The way you negotiate your contracts if you're using a cloud storage, also important. Many people don't know you can get fixed costs for a certain amount rather than variable costs. But you just have to know to go down that model first. And then once you've got more than 12 months worth of data, start to summarize it. You don't need the minutiae of every data point that's changed. You just need the history. Seasonal changes mean you want to keep some data, but summaries are enough at that point. Now, who has gone down the road, quick show of hands, and not realized what the cloud cost would be or the storage cost? Yeah? A few. Storage costs will go up every single year. Bear in mind, their model is more data, the more they can charge you. The more compute power you're going to use. Here's the catch. Not enough data means you can't make intelligent decisions. So collecting something like temperature every 4 times a day is not enough. Once an hour, once every half an hour would probably be sufficient. If you go change a value every time it changes, every 0.1 of a degree it will store data. You don't really want that much data. Because if you're sat in a room and it changes by 0.1 of a degree, you probably haven't noticed. And that's actually critical. Because we won't notice the change, but the system will notice every 0.01 of a change. At least a huge amount of information being stored. Will you get a better outcome by knowing every time it changes by 0.1 of a degree? No. Will it make you change the way the building operates? No. But if you actually say every half an hour I can see my temperature is struggling to be maintained, then you can go and do something operationally, make the change, and possibly even automate the change. There are platforms out there now that will allow you to automate changes without having to go back to facilities, back to a BMS company, back to somebody to manually change it. If you go to that level of optimization, you will start to see savings almost immediately. But you've got to allow and trust that the live changes it makes are worth doing. How do you know? We would suggest you make some samples, rooms, or sample areas to see how it's working for your building. So, we're going to have some questions. I'm going to start asking you questions in a minute. Okay. Reduction in data gathering makes a lot of sense. You don't need too much. Make sure you get the right strategy. Strategy itself should be worked out by somebody that understands buildings, not by a data scientist. If you're getting information from the lighting sensor to say there's somebody in the room, and you're using that to drive other data that you want to collect, you need to strategize how often you want it, how much of a change you want to store, because otherwise you've got other costs to consider, other people that you might need to do analysis of the data, or you've got a subscription cost to something else to do it. AI on building data, I've seen lots of people say they can do it. The reality behind it is most of it isn't AI. It's some form of machine learning or some other algorithm they're running to try and pretend it's AI. If you're given a load of machine information, rooms occupied, temperatures changed, fans doing this, there's no air coming in from outside, the weather's changed outside, do you need AI for that? Before AI was ever a buzzword, how would you have dealt with that? Some of you have been in the industry a while. I'm going to pick on you, Mr. Coogan. Brian does this full-time for a living as a consultant. How would you have said to a client, before AI came along, that you would do that level of analysis?
Honestly, John, it would have been simply done through system integration.
Yeah.
And we would have had tolerances built into it and active on-off activations on the data we got. It wouldn't have been AI, it would have been simple on-off built into system integration.
But even today, you don't actually need AI for that.
AI for that?
No.
No.
Automation. Do you need AI for automation?
Okay, now that's interesting. AI could discover patterns you don't see. AI has the ability to see what the humans can see over time with big data. So I would say it would help automation, but do you need it? No, but would it help you to add to the intelligence of what you're doing? Probably.
Mm-hmm. Why probably?
Why probably? You need AI for automation because, again, it can interrogate the data, interrogate the information, and do it continuously all the time, and give you, again, patterns and results that, as a human, we don't see. So, do you need it to actually automate? No, but it would. If you had it, it would definitely help.
Okay. That technology to do that level of analysis existed 20 years ago in a 700,000 square foot building. We went out to market to get a cost for a platform then. The cost was so high, nobody wanted to do it.
Yeah, again, two major things is happening with AI. Our processing power has increased, so therefore it's coming cheaper. And now we have the massive data to interrogate. So what 9 years ago was costing a fortune, it's still expensive today, don't get me wrong, but the price point is coming down continuously. So right now, John, the older technology absolutely can deliver incredible results. But we will get to a stage where I think AI will become the default technology.
Yeah, so in reality, projects been running for 3 or 4 years, won't have caught up with the changes yet. They'll still be being delivered a slightly older way. when you start a new project now or retrofit a building, having the data, analyzing it would help.
Definitely.
Yeah. Getting the data quickly is a very complex situation. At the moment, you'd have to go in, look at what protocols they're using, how you're going to get the information, do a lot of manual work for how it's working. You can automate that data discovery. That is now possible without the manual effort required.
And it's, and that process is now opening the retrofit market.
Yeah.
That what we desperately need,
Yeah. So you can reduce the cost to do it by having automated discovery, automated mapping of the building, and then just doing a small amount of work to say that device exists here in the building. So in practical terms, we've worked out and have done this for a client. A project that would have taken us 9 months to get the information, we got down to 2. By using automation at this point for data gathering and having the right strategy. So technology is moving fast, but not once have I needed AI yet. Not saying I won't in the future, but at the moment, not necessary. So you can get a much quicker return on investment. That is now possible. Previously, the return on investment conversation I was having with clients was very complicated. How do you actually get a return? What are you saving me? More reactive space? Well, meeting rooms are a simple example. But if you could book a desk, knowing that it's in a non-noisy area to your comfort level, you get a much more interactive and use of the space. Knowing floors are not used, you can turn the floor off. You possibly might get the information to sublet part of the building. All of that is actually important in the current real estate market because in different parts of the globe, the return to work pattern is very different. In California, they've got less than 30% of people returning. In the UK, in London, that's higher now, roughly 50%. That will change over time. In some countries, they don't want to come back to the office. Even different states. You can increase your energy savings by having information. And because of European law changes that are in effect from next year, for anyone that's got buildings in Europe, you will have to do combined reporting on ESG and finances together. That was announced by them a few months ago. 12 brand new standards that everyone around Europe has to apply to. It's publicly available information, so you can just Google for it. This, in different countries, has got different priorities. In Europe, they've brought it forward to next year. Not 2025, not 2030, next year. UK, they haven't announced what the new dates will be yet. US, who knows? Under the current regime, they're going to stick to 2030 and 2050. Under a new regime, they may change the dates completely. Nobody knows. Does anyone think we shouldn't be reducing carbon? Or is that too political for you to answer? Right, at this point, I'll take any questions you want on data or buildings we've done. And we've got a few minutes left, and that's it. Yep, down here.
Thank you for that. I'm an energy manager. Coming from that perspective, we're looking at smarter buildings. So AI integration is the way forward, not just smart buildings. What's your verdict on that? Because essentially, if you can forecast a trend, then you can preempt the excessive energy wastage.
So at the moment, most people don't have enough data for that. Okay, in the real world, most people have not collected enough information for that to work. Okay, or got the balance of information right. The trend analysis was always possible, but with a bit more manual effort. Okay, so the balance between them will shift. AI, as Brian quite rightly pointed out, over time will become more prevalent, but you've got to have got the right information for it. If you started with no information, AI can do nothing. If you have too much information, AI may do a very complex analysis you may not need. You've got to get that balance right. So AI will come, absolutely sure. But at the moment, most people don't even have the right data strategy to make that work. Hopefully that answers your question. Anyone else?
For logistic type buildings, will the data strategy be different for commercial buildings?
Yes, because most logistic buildings have very open spaces, and the amount of cooling required is very different. Humidity control becomes more important than actual temperature often. So the amount of data and the frequency of collection would be different. They often want to add security data to it. Is the facility still secure? Are the cages being opened too often? Other data becomes important to them. They're not so much cooling people, they're looking after products.
Should we be thinking about the data strategy now for commercial buildings so it can be used in logistic type buildings? Or is it a totally different approach?
They would be two slightly different strategies. The basics of collecting data too often would still apply because of cloud costs and other storage costs. But the strategy of how often you collect certain types of data would be different.
I probably should have asked this question earlier then, because I think it's going to take a little bit. Apologies, John Harding. I'm the head of estates for UCLH and run quite a COVID-stressed portfolio in central London. How would you go about adopting strategies of this nature when you're in the background of compliance and some very key and rigid requirements for operational conditions, for want of a better phrase?
A question I was asked last week by somebody that's got nearly 200 buildings. For me, when you've got a lot of operational considerations, you're not just looking at the data itself, you're looking at how people are using the building and why they're using that building and not another one you might have. That becomes just as relevant as the actual raw data. But by gathering actual usage, people in and out from turnstiles, if you've got them, in and out through other security systems, or people counting, that layer of data, it becomes more important than the actual temperature to start with, because you need to know how many people are where. What building, what floor are they on? How are they using the building? Once you've got that right, then you can overlay the rest of the data and make some intelligent choices about, I can shut a floor down, why we've got all these lifts running, or elevators if you're American. All of that becomes another level of operational consideration.
So one of the biggest challenges we've got is, if you take operating theatres as an example, an incredibly high energy consumption area, which is often available 24/7 and doesn't need to be, but the requirement to ensure its validation and its clinical operation at a level, if you turn it off, you've got to go through a whole variety of revalidation exercises.
Well, you've got to recalibrate as well, and that becomes a real difficult thing to do.
Yeah, so effectively you're adding another layer of the evaluation exercise to how often are we using it, what are we using it for, and then is it back to a suitable environment to be used for next?
So that becomes the balance between the cost and effort of recalibrating and taking it out of use against constantly running it, keeping it calibrated. In most cases, people will just leave it running because getting back to a clean room, recalibrating, deep cleaning is a hell of a cost. I've done it. I was shocked how much it actually cost. Tens of thousands for a day to get a room back to usable state.
Yeah, totally agree. It's the biggest challenge that we have, that's for sure.
Yeah. If there are no only other questions, we're on stand D30.